Story time. We are doing Epstein Street Part 4. Okay, so in Epstein Street Part 3, the last part was Roderick and Lila basically busting ass off of Epstein Street because they found his friend Jacob in a very soulless state. Like he was there physically, but not in a way that I guess Roderick wanted to find his friend. Nonetheless, Roderick was still glad that he's alive. This is a breakthrough. This is a lot more from him not knowing at all what was going on. And of course, as we mentioned in the last segment, you cannot go on Epstein Street by yourself. You are destined to never come back. Hence, Roderick's friend, Jacob, who is still on Epstein Street. So Lila she's overwhelmed. She's over it. She storms off. She's on her way back up to her apartment. She makes it back up there and she just sprawls herself onto the carpet. And she's trying to emotionally and mentally detach. This is her defense mechanism. A lot took place today. So she's already, despite her, I guess, desire to detach, she's already accepted and came to terms with the fact that she is somehow attached to Epstein Street. And moving forward, she's gonna need answers. She's gonna need more answers. And Buddy Roderick is a little too emotionally attached to Epstein Street. And she remembered when they got there and Samira warned them, like, this is not a good idea. You guys have to go. Like, he went ahead. He just moved forward, and he moved forward with emotion. No logic, no, can we just take a minute? Can we step back for a second? It was just driven emotionally. She can't talk to her best friend about it because her best friend has absolutely no idea what's going on. She can't talk to anybody else about it because she's gonna, seem crazy, and she already feels crazy. So for a split second, she kind of wishes that she could summon Samira. And then of course, she shoos the thought away and she gets up and she sort of ambles her way into her bedroom and lays on her bed and stares at the ceiling, trying again to emotionally and mentally detach. So for a second, she closes her eyes, slowly opens them, and she felt like she saw movement out the corner of her eye. And she gets nervous. Her room is spacious, it's large, and it's a pretty open floor plan. So she sits up, she sort of jolts up in bed, and she gets nervous mainly because she remembers Roderick telling her of her abilities. She remembers Roderick telling her that no one or no entity that is sort of residing on Epstein Street has ever made it off of Epstein Street. And Lila is the only person that has been able to allow Samira to be set free from that horrid place. So she's now thinking that maybe she set something else free and they are hanging out with her in her apartment. So she starts to wander around her apartment building or her apartment. And I feel like she would feel a little bit better in this present moment if it were just somebody who broke in, an actual human being, something that she can touch and feel that broke into her place, than it would be to discover that it was just something that she brought back with her from Epstein Street. So she circles her apartment probably about 3 times in paranoia, finds nothing, hears nothing, sees nothing, and just concludes that it's just her, it's her nerves, it's her emotions, it's everything from what took place with her and Roderick on Epstein Street. And she finds her way back to her bedroom. She sits on the bed, she closes her eyes, she takes a deep breath, and she opens it, and it's her friend, Samira, standing in front of her. She doesn't startle. Much to her surprise, she might be a little relieved because she was just thinking, I need answers. And Roderick right now is too emotionally attached to this whole situation to get answers. So Samira stands before her and she doesn't say anything for a second. And finally, Lila asks her, like, what now? Like, where do we go from here? So Samira reminds her that they made a really bold decision today to venture onto Epstein Street with absolutely no solid plan in mind. And the only plan that they had was to find someone that wasn't supposed to be found, I guess, based on Epstein Street's standards. So Samira reiterates to her exactly what Roderick told her, like, you possess abilities that sort of open up this realm to the outside world, to those spirits that live on Epstein Street, that are being held there. It's their purgatory. They cannot be set free. But not all of them have good intentions. Not all of them just want to be set free. Some of them legit want to just wreak havoc on your world, and you need to be careful. And that's why I told you, you can't just venture on to Epstein Street like this. And so, of course, Lila then says, okay, well, what now? Like, I feel like I need to know why I'm so attached to Epstein Street. Where's the connection? Where is this coming from? And Samira sort of paces, wanders around the room, and finally sits back in front of her and says, unfortunately, the answers that you're looking for, you and Roderick, they're all on Epstein Street. Your approach, it's too drastic. You are going to be figured out by all of the dark shadows. Yes, fucking dark shadows. So, shit, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so Lila, sorry. I'm coming back. Lila asks her, what are the dark shadows? So Samira explains to her that those are the entities, those are the spirits that don't have positive intent. They are powerful, but they don't possess much power just here on Epstein Street. They need to be, amongst the living. They need to be out there in the world. And that's why people that come to Epstein Street alone don't make it out. They're trying to build something here for themselves. They need humans. They need that power from you guys. You, however, don't need to be kept here. You are the key to set them free. You need to be careful. You can't just wander onto Epstein Street with this kind of power and these kinds of capabilities. You're going to be figured out. These people, these entities, these dark shadows, they're going to find you and they're going to do with you what they want. So Lila now gets up and she starts to pace and she's wondering, okay, should I tell Roderick? Does Roderick know this? Of course he knows this. He was the one that told me that I had this ability. Like, where am I supposed to go from here? What am I supposed to do with this information? So Samira reminds her to have a seat. So Samira asks her, what are you trying to gain from this? What do you want to do outside of just figuring out what your attachment is? Is there anything else that you need from Epstein Street? So Lila begins to answer her, and then Samira stops her and she says, before we even move forward, I need you to understand, I'm not even supposed to be here. I am not supposed to be helping you. I cannot be this close to you. We all give off, these energies. And if I stick around you for too long, I take this back. They pick up on that. And they're going to know exactly where you are, exactly what, despite the fact that their powers are dimmed on Epstein Street, they still have them. They know how to summon you, how to make you feel like you need to come back to Epstein Street. With all that being said, so Lila reaches out to Roderick and, she tells him that she'd like to meet back up with him, but someplace other than Epstein Street, like a diner or a cafe. So of course he agrees. He's excited because he thinks that Lila is going to say, okay, we can go back right away. We can do this. We can dive right back in dangerously like we did just, a few hours ago. And they meet up at their cafe, and Roderick, for some reason, is starting to look better and better every time they meet up, like his hair is cut now and he's clean shaven and he doesn't necessarily look like he gave up on life anymore. So they sit down across from one another, and Lila asks him, like, is Jacob the only thing that you want to retrieve from Epstein Street? Is that it? And he nods slowly. But of course, Lila gets the impression that there's more that Roderick isn't telling her. So she's beginning to now feel like she's in this kind of more alone than she is with anyone else, with Samira, with Roderick. She doesn't have a solid support system. So moving forward, she says, Samira, she tells him that Samira visited her, and, everything that she presented to Lila, she's telling Roderick, I feel like we need to be careful. I feel like we need to slow down, and I feel like we need to devise a much more subtle plan. So Roderick now seems incredibly frustrated, and he's like, there's no subtle way to do this. There's no discreet way to do this. There's no quiet way to do this. We just have to go in there and get what it is we want. So now she's, things aren't making sense. Roderick's initial approach was so, I guess, calm and level-headed, logical. Now, all of a sudden, he seems very anxious, very driven to go back there. And it just seems like every time they meet up, there's more and more motivation. And she's starting to question where all of this is coming from. And she's looking at him and she's, so confused. Like, I thought you were the one that warned me that once we started, like, we have to think clearly, we have to be wise, we have to be, thoughtful about every step that we take. Where is all of this angst coming from? Like, where's all of this high energy coming from? And she notices sort of like an uneasy, I guess, inability for him to like completely focus on her. Like, his eyes are kind of shifty and he shifts in his seat. And she thinks back to the first time they met and how his voice was sort of monotone. Like it held weight, but it wasn't as animated as it is right now. And so she sits back and she begins to study him for a little bit, for the 30 seconds that he's unable to focus on her. He's sort of lost in his frustration. And she remembers the warning that she got from Samira. You have to be careful because those dark shadows, despite the fact that their powers are dimmed, they still possess the powers. So Lila leans forward a little bit and she looks at him and she was like, are you sure you're okay? Are you sure that everything is all right? And he like jerks back and he's like, I'm fine. And he like grabs his coffee off the table and he gets up and he storms out the cafe. Lila's uncomfortable because she's starting to feel like everything that Samira just warned her about is slowly starting to trickle into her life. She feels like Roderick is becoming a victim. And she's beginning to realize that if he's becoming a victim, if he's being used by those dark shadows, then they have already begun to figure out that Lila has these special capabilities. But why haven't they started to mess with her head? Why haven't they been able to reach out to her the way they've been able to manipulate Roderick? These are the answers that she needs to find. These are the things that she's, it's too late now. It's better now to just keep going forward than it is to turn around. We're in too deep. We're already emotionally, mentally, spiritually attached to Epstein Street, the one place she vowed never to go. And she's thinking, well, I can't necessarily summon Samira back. She literally just told me that she can't help me as often and she can't just, sweep right on back into my bedroom and start like presenting me with all this information. So she's still in the diner by herself and she sees Roderick like pacing up and down outside the diner, really uncomfortable, obviously not himself. So she remembers Samira saying like, you have to be subtle. You have to be wise in your approach. You have to think things through before you do it. So Lila sees Roderick pacing up and down in front of the diner. And she thinks to herself that there has to be a way to be able to get him to connect back to reality, to connect back to her, to sort of sever that connection that he has to the dark shadows. because obviously there's some manipulation going on there. They're obviously trying to use him to throw Lila off course. So she thinks the only thing that she knows about him that's holding him near and dear and I guess keeping him sane is Jacob, finding his friend. So she feels like if she could just go out there and connect him back to Jacob, bring him up to Roderick and start asking Roderick questions about Jacob, it will sort of sever that connection that the Dark Shadows have been able to create. So she gets up and she starts wandering outside. She pays the barista and, she looks at Roderick and he sort of like, tries to take a couple of steps back. And she starts asking him questions like, you didn't really tell me much about Jacob. Why are you so close to him? And his breathing pattern sort of changes. And he was like, what do you mean? I told you everything that you needed to know about Jacob. And she says, no, you didn't. I feel like, you didn't tell me about how you guys became friends. Did you guys grow up together? Did you guys go to the same elementary school? Like, do you guys have any crazy experiences that you did together? Why are you so close to Jacob? Why is this so important to you? And again, she notices his breathing pattern starts to slow down a little bit more, and that shifty feeling that she gets in his eyes and in his energy, it's starting to settle down. And he's not pacing as much, but he also isn't necessarily able to sit still. So he says, well, Jacob's a cool guy, very vague. And she was like, okay, so how cool is he? What makes him cool? What makes him funny? And his energy is, again, like slowly starting to shift. And he was like, well, he has a great sense of humor. He's definitely been able to get me out of trouble. His speech is starting to slow down a little bit. It's starting to regain its natural monotone nature. And, she's beginning to realize that despite the fact that these dark shadows, they have powers and abilities of their own, she has powers and abilities of her own. And she needs to learn how to use them. She needs to hone in on them. And so Roderick now, slowly coming back to himself, slowly starting to detach from whatever it is the dark shadows try to latch onto. He's now immersed in the friendship that he had with Jacob. And Lila now says, okay, that's cool. Jacob sounds like a great guy. If we're going to get him back, we need to be, she's repeating herself, what she said in the beginning of this conversation, because now she's actually talking to Roderick. We need to be wise and subtle about our approach. So Roderick now nods, a very different response from what she got in the very beginning here of this conversation. And he says, okay, so what do you suggest? And she says, okay, well, let's get back into the diner or the coffee shop, whatever I said it was. And we'll sit down and we'll talk about it. So they get back in there and she starts telling him about what Samira told her. And it dawns on her. In the beginning of this conversation, she told him what Samira was telling her. And she realized that at that point, she wasn't talking fully to Roderick. She realized that she has now exposed Samira to the dark shadows. So in acknowledging that she's been able to sever that connection that was allowing Roderick to be manipulated by the dark shadows, she realized that prior to this, she was communicating with the dark shadows and she exposed Samira. She told the dark shadows that Samira was trying to help her. So now, looking at Roderick, who is now Roderick, she's realizing that she has to try to tell Samira, let her know that she's in danger. Lila doesn't necessarily understand the extent of, I guess, what makes a dark shadow and what makes Samira separate from that. All she knows is that Samira is trying to help her and she needs to protect her at this point. So a light bulb goes off and she looks at Roderick and she says, Roderick, like, we have to help Samira. So Roderick looks confused and he's like, what are you talking about? So she fills him in once more, and she tells him that Samira told her that she can't stick around. She can't help her. She can't alert the dark shadows of her intent of what she's trying to do for Lila. So Roderick is now starting to realize what's going on, and he's like, okay, well then how are we supposed to do this? We have to find something that's incredibly close, attached to Samira to find a way to communicate with her. So they're brainstorming, they're going through a few things, and Roderick asks Lila, he says, you know if any of her family members are still alive? Lila has absolutely no idea. She's like, I have no idea how I would know something like that. No freaking clue. So they go back to the article that was talking about the whole event that took place on Epstein Street all those years ago that caused all of those, I guess, what are they called? And she found like this quote that her mother had said, like something at the bottom of, you know, them describing Samira and, you know, the person that they lost. Samira was a daughter, an A student, da-da-da-da-da-da. And at the end, you know, her mother had made a statement and said, you know, I have lost my best friend, you know, like something that alludes to the fact that her and her mother was close. So then Lila now says, okay, maybe if her mother's still alive, we can try to find answers from her. And whatever it is her mother can express or expose to us about her, like we could use that to try to get in touch with Samira. They go to public records and they look up Samira's last name, knowing that it's not a super common last name, Nazar. And of course they don't know her mother's first name. They don't really know anything outside of her first and last name, where she went to school, and that she lost her life in that tragic accident on Epstein Street. And now that her and her mother were super close, you know, they're just like pulling clues from wherever they can get them. So they pretend to be Jehovah's Witnesses and they go to these 3 houses to try to find Samira's mom. And you know, the first 2 failed. The last one, fingers crossed, they knock on the door and this beautiful older woman, she's old, but she looks like, you know, she's taking care of herself. She doesn't live alone. They see in the background this gentleman sort of walk past and ask who that is at the door. And she tells him it's Jehovah's Witness. And that's when Lila decides to fill her in. Actually, you know, my name is Lila. She sort of pauses and tries to figure out how she's supposed to tell her that, you know, I'm close friends with your daughter who died like 20 years ago. She comes up with like a lie off the top of her head. You know, I'm doing an article on the event that took place on Epstein Street all those years ago, and I just felt like I needed more authenticity. I needed a direct interview with someone who lost a close loved one on Epstein Street. So Samira's mom sort of pauses and squints her eyes at the 2 of them because Roderick was with her. And she says, okay, what kind of questions will you be asking? Like I'm gonna be honest, this just seems a little strange. So Lila says, you know, they're very straightforward questions, very basic. We just wanna ask, you know, we wanna get an idea of how this event like affected the people that, you know, weren't necessarily involved directly. And, you know, she knows that it sounds like she's pulling nonsense directly from thin air, but she's running out of options. You know, they didn't really think this through, but they were desperate, and she's worried about Samira. So Samira's mother steps outside, closes the door because it's clear that she's suspicious herself and she doesn't want her husband knowing what's going on. So they sit on the porch and she says, okay, let's make this quick. I don't want my husband to find out, and I am not super comfortable with the direction this is going in. So Lila starts asking questions about how, oh shit, no, I can't say that. She was supposed to say at some point that she didn't lose anybody on Epstein Street, right? Okay, all right. So Samira's mom opens the door. It's this beautiful older woman. She's clearly older, but she's been taking really good care of herself. And so they see in the background this older gentleman sort of like amble past and ask who's at the door. And Samira's mom says, oh, it's just Jehovah's Witness. So Lila then says, actually, my name is Lila, and I'm writing an article on the event that took place on Epstein Street. So then Samira's mom sort of squints her eyes and looks at them and says, okay, I'm sorry, but what does that have to do with me? And so she says, well, you know, our records show that you lost your daughter, Samira. And she says, no, I did lose my daughter, Samira, around the very same time that whole tragic event took place on Epstein Street. But I didn't lose her to that tragic event. That's not how my daughter died. So then Lila looks at Roderick looks at Lila, and they're all sort of standing there confused. And her mother Samira's mother breaks the silence and says, okay, so how am I supposed to be able to help you guys today? I'm sorry. And how exactly do you know about my daughter, you know? So at this point, both Roderick and Lila realize that they're going to have to expose more truth about the situation than they'd like to. It's just a matter of figuring out how, and in like a matter of 30 seconds. I don't know what else to say. Shit, it's about to end this right here. Like, you're just going to have to find out on the next segment of Epstein Street. Can I do that? Is there a better way to do this? Okay, I'm gonna just say that. So Roderick and Lila both look at one another and they realize that they're gonna have to expose more truth about the situation than they realized. You know, they obviously didn't think this through, but they weren't expecting to be hit with, you know, this kind of information. So now Lila is now thinking, okay, maybe she's lying to us. Maybe she just doesn't want any parts of this. So then she brings up the article to Samira's mother. I think the food's here. Hello? Okay, great. Okay. Yes, coming down right now. Okay, all right. He was like, hello, Ashley, this is Demetrius. I'm downstairs with your order. Okay.
Until he sounded like I heard him over that fence.
Okay. All right. So then Lila brings up the article. She's like, are you sure? Because her picture shows up in the article that's associated with the tragic event that took place on Epstein Street. So her mother shakes her head and she says, you know, that's always been a very strange confusion to me. I don't know how her picture landed in that article. I don't understand. So then Lila says, okay, but you also quoted that you lost a best friend. She was like, well, at that time, I did lose my best friend. I wasn't comprehending anything outside of the fact that I lost my child and my best friend. So now Lila is confused. She now needs to know how Samira is associated with Epstein Street. How did she meet her on Epstein Street? Why was she even stuck there in the first place? And how is it that Lila gave her the ability to be set free from that place? What is going on? You're gonna find all this out on the next segment of Epstein Street. Thank you. I'm done. Make sure you subscribe though. Shit.
Let's do one that's a little more formal.
Okay. The subscribe? Okay. Do I start over from like, make sure, like, where am I starting from?
Starting from like, and that wraps it up for this segment. And make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and subscribe.
Okay, so that wraps it up for this segment of Epstein Street. Make sure you comment, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and thank you. so much for watching. Shit! Okay. Goddamn. Ugh.